Hello class, welcome back to our third lecture video here on Unit 4, Photosynthesis. In this lecture video, we are going to focus on plant leaf structure as well as the structure of a chloroplast, where all the pigments are located. So let's begin. All parts of a leaf are designed to maximize their ability to do two things. All right, the first one is absorb light and undergo photosynthesis. All right, leaves are green, all right, in the spring and summertime. So that is where all the pigment is located that is absorbing sunlight and turning it into chemical energy. And besides photosynthesis, a plant leaf is also designed to reduce or minimize the amount of what we call transpiration. Transpiration is the loss of water through evaporation in a plant leaf. So transpiration is the equivalent of perspiration that we do when our body temperatures exceed what their optimum range should be, and we start to sweat in order to lose heat and cool off. Plants will also sweat through the process of transpiration. Water vapor will literally be lost through the plant leaves through little openings which are equivalent to the pores on our skin. All right, now we're not going to be learning about these parts of a leaf. What we want to do is we want to look at the microscopic portions. So if I could zoom in where my laser pointer is right now and look at the actual cross-section of a leaf, I would see this up top in the right-hand corner. This would be the top of the leaf. This would be the underside of the leaf, but you can see there's actually some depth to it. And there's lots of different components that you can see within it that are all green, because that's where the pigments are located, in the chloroplast. So these are the parts of the leaf that we're going to focus on identifying as well as learning what their functions are. So here is a diagram of a cross-section of a plant leaf with all the components that I want you to be able to visually identify as well as know what their functions are. The ones that I have a little cross next to, bundle, sheath, and trichome, I'm not going to ask you to know what those are or identify them. All right, so let's go in order, starting from over here with cuticle, and then we'll go counterclockwise, moving from there. So the cuticle is a very thin layer that is on the very top of what we call the upper epidermis. The cuticle literally is a waxy layer that, since wax is nonpolar, water will be repelled. Right? Water does not like nonpolar since water is polar itself. So this waxy layer that's on the top and also sometimes found on the bottom of the leaf are there to stop water vapor from being able to escape through the leaf itself. Next, we have the upper epidermis. There's both an upper epidermis and a lower epidermis. This is a thick single layer of cells that are lined up one after the other. Their function ultimately is to surround and protect the interior components of the leaf. Then we have the filling of the leaf. All right, or the middle component that is described as the mesophyll, all right, the middle filling per se. And there's both a top mesophyll and a bottom mesophyll. The top mesophyll is referred to as the Palisade Mesophyll, or just Palisade layer. This is characterized by many elongated cells that are compacted and butted up right next to each other. This layer is loaded with chloroplast because this is the layer where the majority of light will be absorbed and photosynthesis will occur. Underneath the Palisade mesophyll layer, we have what's called the spongy mesophyll layer. Why? Because it looks like a sponge. There's lots of little air spaces in between all these cells that are loosely compacted together. They're not densely compacted and touching each other. All right? They are not densely compacted because you want area for little air spaces. The spongy mesophyll does two things. First, photosynthesis will occur in this region because it is green, so there are chloroplasts in these cells, but this is not where the majority of photosynthesis occurs. That will be up here in the Palisade layer. What does happen in the spongy mesophyll area, this is where gas exchange occurs within the leaf. Now, what do I mean by gas exchange? All right, we've already learned that plants need carbon dioxide to make sugar, and one of the waste products is is oxygen. Well, when CO2 is brought into the leaf through a pore that we call a stoma, and we'll get to that in a second, the CO2 builds up in the spongy mesophyll until it's absorbed by any of the Palisade or spongy mesophyll cells. When I say absorbed, when the CO2 diffuses from high to low into the cells where it's used to make glucose. When oxygen is produced as a waste product, it will diffuse out of all the cells, both Palisade and spongy, build up in this airspace until the oxygen diffuses back out of the leaf into the atmosphere through what we call the stoma. I'm going to jump down here now to what we call the guard cells and the stoma. These guard cells open and close an opening just like a pore that we call the stoma. The stoma literally is an opening between these guard cells, and this is how gases such as carbon dioxide and oxygen can enter or leave the leaf. And the stoma can be closed by the guard cells. The guard cells open and close the stoma. All right, so if it's really hot out and the plant is losing a lot of water due to transpiration, the plant can actually swell its guard cells up, so in essence inflate them. So you close the stomata. All right, stomata is plural, stoma would be singular. It will close the stoma, or stomata plural, in order to avoid the loss of water directly through the open pores. All right, the guard cells open and close by pumping water in or out of themselves. And then finally, what we have is what we call the vascular bundle, or the vein of a leaf. And you can see veins all over the place, right? Branching out to every section of it, leading to the stems, to the branches, to the trunk of the tree. In the vein, it's surrounded by a layer of cells called the bundle sheath. We don't need to remember that one, though. But there is a top portion and a bottom portion of every vein. Regardless of what picture that you look at, what color they're listed as, the top portion of the vein is called the xylem. The bottom portion is referred to as the phloem. The xylem in this picture is blue, so guess what? It's transporting water. So what the xylem does is it transports water from the roots of the plant all the way up against gravity. Remember cohesion and adhesion we discussed in the beginning of the year. The water is traveling up the plant from the roots through the xylem until it gets to all the leaves where it's needed for photosynthesis. All right, the water that plants get for photosynthesis isn't coming through the leaves, it's coming from the roots. And then once photosynthesis is performed and glucose is produced, that glucose will be released. It will diffuse from high to low concentration into the phloem. The phloem is now going to bring sugars, glucose, down a plant. So the phloem is going to remove sugars from the leaf that are being produced from photosynthesis, and they'll travel through the leaves back to the stems, to the branches, to the trunk, and to all the other parts of a tree or bush that are not photosynthetic, meaning they're not green. So the branches, the trunk, the roots, etc., where photosynthesis doesn't occur, those cells get fed by sugars produced by the leaves. So one more time, xylem is carrying water up a tree from the roots. Phloem is going to be carrying sugars, the sap, which is the lifeblood of the tree, from the leaves down to all the non-photosynthetic portions of the leaf. All right, so I'm going to want you to be able to identify all these components as well as know what their functions are. Now, the chloroplast, that organelle we said where photosynthesis occurs, is going to be in every single cell, both palisade and spongy, that you find within the leaf itself. In some species, you can even find chloroplast in the upper epidermis, the lower epidermis, as well as even the guard cells themselves. But for now, we're going to focus on the chloroplast mainly being found in both the Palisade Mesophyll layer and the spongy mesophyll layer. All right, we can use this. You can pause the video right now to try to practice identifying all these components that are listed here. But now let's begin talking about looking inside of a chloroplast. So again, you can see a cross-section of a leaf up here. All right, what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in on one of those cells. All right, look at one of them and bring one of those green little blobs out. And here's what the chloroplast looks like. All right, this is an organelle that again is responsible for and adapted to undergo photosynthesis. remember from our last unit, we discussed that they are originally evolved from bacteria. They, in fact, are still ancient bacteria. They can just no longer live on their own anymore. They're fully dependent on protection and being given everything they need to survive by the overall plant or organism. All right, so let's look at the minute structures of the chloroplast itself. So here's a generic diagram of the chloroplast. First, I want you to see that there's actually both an outer membrane. So there's an outer lipid bilayer, and then there's actually a second lipid bilayer internally, an inner membrane. So this has, instead of a cell wall and a cell membrane, it actually has two lipid bilayers for added protection for the interior components. Now, the first important component are what we call the thylakoids. These are little membrane-bound sacs that contain pigments within the chloroplast. So each one of these little discs, where my cursor is, looks like a little frisbee or a pancake that are all stacked on top of one another. These individual ones are thylakoids. So you can see right here I have three little lines pointing to individual discs because each one of them is a thylakoid. All of the pigments, chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and the accessory pigments are found within these thylakoid discs. A stack of thylakoids, a single stack, is referred to as a grana, is referred to as a granum. All right, so one single stack is a granum. All of the stacks together is the grana. So I apologize for that. Again, a single stack is a granum. All the stacks of thylakoids are the grana. Right? The reason why they're stacked is so you can fit more of them inside of the chloroplast. You also are able to increase the amount of surface area for light absorption. The liquid-filled region outside of all the thylakoids is what we call the stroma. So this is a thick fluid that protects and insulates all of the thylakoid membranes that are within the interior portion of the chloroplast. The thylakoids, I said, are where the pigments are located. So light absorption during photosynthesis occurs within the thylakoids. So the energy needed to make sugar occurs here along each and every thylakoid. That energy, which is going to be ATP and NADPH, a reduced electron carrier, will be used then out here in the second portion of photosynthesis called the Calvin cycle. That energy that was harvested from light will then be used to put CO2 together as well as some water molecules into glucose molecules, C6H12O6. So make sure that you are aware of how you can identify all of these key components of the chloroplast. One last thing you can see here, and when we get into our discussion of photosynthesis, this will come into play a little bit more. The interior portion of each thylakoid is referred to as the lumen. All right, this is, again, a liquid-filled region, so if the stroma is liquid-filled and protects all the individual thylakoids, within each thylakoid disc, you also have a liquid filling, which we call the lumen. All right, as we're going to see later on, the lumen is where that hydrogen ion concentration is going to build up that is later going to be used by ATP synthase to make ATP. All right, so using this lecture, once again, you want to be able to make sure that you can visually identify all these components of the chloroplast. Tell me what their functions are based on what I've said, as well as what's listed, as well as all the different components of a plant leaf structure, both visual identification and function. If you have any questions, please make sure to ask me during our next class period. Thank you very much.